And this is a question that is very popular, and a lot of our clients asking, and they all would like to know, are the property prices are going to fall?
Yeah, so we are getting this question, quite a lot from people coming through, and obviously there's a lot of media exposure in regards to this topic as well. Obviously, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows. Anyone who is saying, property prices are going to fall X percent, it's forecasting, so we don't know what's going to happen. But what we have been able to do, and I mean what our company relies on, is data. So we have been able to review what happened over the last 5 recessions or depressions or crises that have happened since the 70s, when major falls in the share market have occurred in Australia, and what happened to the national house price through those times. And each time, the national house price in the year after or the subsequent years after a share market crash, they've remained stable, or in some instances, gained as much as 24 and 36% in those times. So obviously we've never been in this exact situation, but we do know that it's fundamentally it's a productive I suppose crisis, and health crisis. It's not a financial crisis. So we believe there'll be some markets that fare better than others, and those markets that were showing strong fundamentals before this happened should pick up and see those strong fundamentals come back when we see some more clarity around the situation. What we do know is that interest rates are obviously at their all-time lows, which has subsequently had a really big effect on affordability. And the affordability in some markets is at 10-year best, and in some instances even as far back as history, it's at its lowest. So that's really positive. It just means that people can get into the market and get into the market easily because of those low interest rates if they've got their deposit. We also know that there's really low stock levels of good quality homes, and there's demand is still there. So with the low stock levels, we think in those good markets that prices will remain steady, and if not rise off the back of those low levels.
Wow. And for those of us who would like to know, is this the right time to buy a property now, or should we wait?
Look, every client or every person is going to have their own situation and circumstances, so it's going to be probably a different answer from one person to the next. But if we're talking homes, and let's use Melbourne as an example because that's where we're based, we're seeing some great off-market opportunities. We're seeing about 2 to 3 off-market opportunities for every good quality listing that's online. So we recommend seeking advice, 1, to take advantage of those off-markets, and 2, to make sure that it's coordinated properly if you're planning on selling to buy, especially so within the same market, so that's done strategically. Our advice would be if it's a long-term strategy, so you're looking at either buying your forever home, let's say in Melbourne, or at least having a 10 to 15 year play in that home, and you can find the right property for you without sacrificing on quality or location of where you want to be, and it's there and you can find it and you can service it and you're comfortable with getting into that debt, then yes, go for it, especially if it's a long-term play for you.
Fantastic. And if we are to buy an investment property, what is going to happen if our tenants lose their jobs?
Yeah, so this is sort of taken a bit of a back burner. Obviously, the JobKeeper, when that was announced and now started flowing through, has taken a lot of pressure off those tenants that were possibly in a situation where they'd lost their jobs and couldn't pay their rent. We've got a rent roll nationally of over 1,000 properties, and we've had a really small percentage of tenants in those properties that literally haven't been able to afford their rent. And then that's been a process then of working and the property managers working with the tenants to try and the landlords obviously to try and devise a strategy out of that. But they're always directed obviously to go back and see, what help can they get or what help's available. For people looking at investing now, the markets that we're active in across the country, they're all got extremely low vacancy rates. So we're looking at 1 to 2.3%. So under supply, and so that's faring well for finding tenants. And then obviously a good property manager is going to do their due diligence on the tenant as well and ask all the right questions. So if you're putting a new tenant in, there's lots of questions to ask and lots of due diligence to do to ensure that they're going to be able to maintain their commitment to their lease. Okay, so I've got some questions for you, Natallia, that I believe your clients and your database have come back to you with, all related to the situation that's going on now. So the first one I've got for you is in regards to the tax-free super withdrawals. Are there any advantages to be had utilising the 2 tax-free super withdrawal options? For example, would it be good to use these to fund a business startup or to pay off a credit card?
It is such a popular question, and I hear this all the time. People are wondering if that's a good option. And I understand what people are trying to do, and interestingly, we had over 1 million Australians applying for the early release of superannuation. And when we look at that release, obviously it's not just about the cost benefit scenario, it's so much more to it. And the government introduced this early release of super just to help Australians to get through this very difficult time. And for those that lost their jobs or whose hours have been reduced significantly, and they need to obviously provide for their families. So this is what it's all about. It's all about putting food on the table and paying your rent and mortgage. And when we look at credit card situation, it is an interesting one, because obviously if you've got a very high credit card debt, you're probably paying roughly between 9 to 22% in interest per annum. And that is a lot. So when you look at your future superannuation returns projections, you're probably going to get 5 to 6% per annum. So taking those two into account, it is obviously from a financial point of view, it is much better to pay off your credit card. That being said, it is really important to take into account that it's just purely to reduce your debt if you're struggling. And it doesn't mean that you go back shopping tomorrow and, crank up the debt again. So from a obviously business point of view, it is obviously not something that the government wants us to do.
Do you mind if I ask a question there? With so many people withdrawing their super, is there ramifications for the super accounts themselves with this money being withdrawn out?
Absolutely. It's all about obviously how, if we are to take the money out of our super, firstly, most likely we will be selling at a lower price because obviously the share market have dropped significantly. Yeah. And secondly, it is obviously the future benefit that we could have if we had decided to keep money in super. And I was actually looking at the Choice, which is the consumer advocate group, and they were comparing $20,000 withdrawal today to $50,000 income in retirement. So it's 1 year of your retirement income that you could have if you decided to keep your money in super.
But what about from the funds point of view, with so much money exiting out? Are there risks from that end?
There was a bit of talk that the government obviously was going to support the industry super funds, but it's all about liquidity, and most of them came back saying we're fine, we've got enough cash on hand to provide for the withdrawals. So it is something obviously that has been in the news lately, but I don't think it's such a concern.
Thank you for that. So I have another question for you. How can I be assured that the ones handling my portfolio are on top of things during these difficult times such as now?
It is a great question, and what we're going through, obviously, it's a very difficult time, unprecedented. We've never experienced anything like this before. So as a financial advisor, my job is to ensure that I stay up to date with everything what's going on, obviously, and I get educated. I've got my professional development happening all the time, and also all of the different, obviously, opportunities in the market. Part of it is obviously our investment philosophy. When we design a portfolio for a client, we do take into account a lot of different things. And some of it is to ensure that obviously when we invest, it's not just about the actual investment, it's about our client, their needs and their long-term goals. It's about their tolerance for risk, how much can they tolerate, and it's all about obviously their income that they will have in the future coming from their portfolio. So it is important that when we do construct a portfolio, it is obviously tailored to our clients' needs, and it's all about for their benefit. So from an educational point of view, personally, I listen to a few different podcasts in the morning just to make sure that I stay up to date. A lot of them are just economic updates, what's happening globally or in Australia, and it does really help just to stay in touch. Also, we do get a lot of information, obviously, from fund managers and our Financial Planning Association that provides a lot of tools and resources. So it is a very busy marketplace. It is a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's really hard to find the actual right information. That's why I think consumers actually struggling to understand what is actually right and what's wrong with all of this that is currently happening. And that's why they go and see a professional who can help them navigate this amount of information out there.
Yeah, and the same in the property market. You know, there's so much information, so I imagine it's so difficult to work out what's relevant and what to listen to. Yeah. Excellent, thank you for that. I have one last question, and this one is: the profitability of all enterprises will be affected by the coronavirus epidemic, many downwards, some steady and a few improving. Is TruWealth analysing clients' portfolios to propose switches to the likely better performing investments during the period of uncertainty which currently prevails?
It is a good question, and as I've mentioned before, we do take into account so many components to our portfolio construction process, and the individual investment is kind of at the very end of the process, and we always start with so much more than that. And as I've mentioned, it's all about obviously the client, their current and future needs, objectives, their risk profile, their tolerance to other aspects, and their preferences. For example, some of our clients prefer ethical investments. And then we take into account obviously the asset allocation. How much are we going to invest in Australian shares, international shares, property, and so forth. So it's all about actually understanding the process. But additional to that, obviously, it is your really understanding what's actually the most important part of the construction process. And we can't get it right all the time. Nobody can get it right, and there was a study conducted in 2017 by Vanguard. They looked at 600 different fund managers in the balanced space over 25 years, and they've discovered that 90% of their performance was contributed to the asset allocation, and only 10% to their market timing and individual investments. So it really shows how asset allocation is so important. And then you've got some other factors, such as, for example, you've got your tax considerations, you've got your patience, that sometimes it is important to buy investment and not to sell it too quickly, because we need to leave it for a while to really make sure that it actually is going to work for you. And that brings me to the timing risk, where a lot of investors try to time the market, and they buy at the high and sell at the low. And a lot of it is all about, obviously, transaction costs that cost money too. So many different components. We can't really predict the future, but we know that if we stick to the fundamentals, which is your proven strategies that exist, and it really will help our clients maximize their outcomes in the future.
Yeah, and very similar with property. Stick to the fundamentals and don't try and time the market. And understand what your goals are and strategize. Yeah.
And so going back to those companies, actually, yes, some companies have lost a lot of the price have gone down, and some might not recover. But we know that obviously, if we look at those companies currently that have their price have come down significantly. If we know that they've got strong balance sheets, they've got great business strategy, and they've got income post COVID-19, that those companies will continue to outperform in the future. But at the same time, it's not just really buying and selling just because another company is going to have better results. It's really quite a thorough research, and that's what obviously is important to take into account. Obviously, so many other things, not just the individual stock.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, thank you for answering those questions so thoroughly. I hope everyone got something out of all of those.
Yes, it's quite an interesting environment, isn't it? And also, again, this is something we've never experienced before. However, the market volatility is constant. And even though we know that it's something like this might not happen again, there will be something else in the future. So it's just making sure that we always keep that long-term view in mind, and that's what is going to give us a better perspective and keep us better investors. Wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the great point about we haven't had this before, and we probably won't have something exactly the same again, but almost every decade there has been a hiccup, a depression, a recession, a crisis, and if you're building your portfolio, whether it's in shares from your point of view or property from mine, it's about building that portfolio to weather all of those scenarios and come out at the end just as strong.
Absolutely. And the key fundamentals: diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And don't try and time the market, because sometimes it just doesn't work. And so just sticking to those long-term objectives and staying positive. I think it's important to stay positive too, because I feel like now everyone just had enough. Everyone
over it.
With me out. It's really, just being
but interesting times ahead. It'll, come September, October, it'll be interesting again as we step out of, what the government stimulus and packages and so forth, and then all the way into, next year and 2022 as well, just to see how it all plays out. It's going to be interesting times.
Absolutely. But great, lovely chatting to you, Sharon. Thank you so much, and hopefully it was very useful and informative for our listeners.
I hope so as well. Thank you for the opportunity.